Hello there, neighbors. Just a quick mention before we jump into the episode. I've been posting a lot more short-form content on TikTok and Instagram. So if you would be so kind, stop on over to either of those platforms and check it out. It's in the same vein as the things that I talk about on the podcast. Once in a while, there's some content there that's a little bit more lighthearted and comedic than the podcast itself, but I think you'll enjoy it. And if you do, please like, follow, and comment if you would. Alrighty then, let's move on to the episode. Alright, so close your eyes for me, unless you're driving, and I want you to picture something. I want you to picture our world as a patient in a hospital. The patient comes through the emergency room doors already crashing. Not one wound, not one broken bone, not one clean diagnosis. Everything is failing at once. The climate is spiking a fever. The food system is wheezing. The wars are bleeding through the bandages. Artificial intelligence is standing in the corner, holding tools nobody fully understands yet. The economy has a pulse, technically, but half the body is numb. Loneliness is eating through the nervous system. Trust is collapsing. Meaning is flickering. Democracy is gasping. And you are the doctor on call. No committee, no retreat, no glossy report with a nice cover and a title like Restoring Civic Confidence in a Fragmented Age. Nothing like that. There's no time for anything like that. The patient is on the table now, so you triage. You can't treat everything first. That's not how emergency medicine works. You have to ask which failure makes every other failure worse. Which wound, if you do not stabilize it, makes every other treatment less likely to work. And the answer is not the loudest wound. The answer is reality. Because if the patient no longer trusts the doctor, the chart, the diagnosis, the medicine, or the person standing beside them, then it doesn't matter how good the treatment is. The patient will rip out the IV, they will call the medicine poison, they will say the monitor is fake news, they will decide the nurse is part of the plot. They will listen to the guy in the parking lot selling miracle supplements out of a van because at least he tells it like it is. That is where we are. We are trying to solve real problems in a country where enormous numbers of people have been taught to distrust anything that might help them understand those problems clearly. Science becomes a hoax. Journalism becomes the enemy. Teachers are threats. Elections become fake if the wrong person wins. Expertise is called elitism. Cruelty is just honesty. Propaganda becomes just asking questions. And no, reality is not a magic cure for every wound. Reality will not lower the temperature of the planet by itself. It will not end war by itself. It will not fix healthcare or housing or wages or loneliness or AI or even democracy by itself. But reality is the thing that allows the real cures to work. Reality is not the cure for every wound. It is the antidote to the poison that keeps us from treating them. Happy Monday, everyone, and welcome to Your Neighbor on the Left, the podcast where we talk about progressive politics, human decency, and life on the blue side of America's ideological divide. My name is Don Spielis. I am your host. And today we're talking about reality, or more specifically, reality repair. And I know how that sounds, but I promise this is not going to be done in some abstract, incense-burning, let's all find our own truth kind of way. I mean reality as a civic necessity. reality as infrastructure, reality as the floor beneath every argument that we have about climate, healthcare, elections, schools, wages, war, technology, rights, basic decency, everything. This is not an episode about one lie. It's not about one app, one cable network, one billionaire, one politician, or one conspiracy theory. It's about the system underneath all of it. How confusion became profitable, how hate became a growth strategy, how loneliness became a market. Distrust became one of the most useful political tools in America. There is no antidote to everything, but there may be an antidote to the poison that is making everything worse. Every major crisis we face requires some shared relationship to reality. Now, that probably sounds obvious, which is usually the first sign that American politics is about to make it stupid. Climate action requires some basic agreement that science is not witchcraft, that measurements can mean something, that rising temperatures and extreme weather and drought and floods and fires and disappearing coastlines are not just vibes cooked up by people with reusable grocery bags and, efficient light bulbs. Public health requires trust that doctors and researchers and nurses and epidemiologists and scientists are not all part of some secret cabal trying to, ruin Thanksgiving. It requires the ability to hear expert advice without immediately running to the loudest guy on Facebook who says he has done his own research, which usually means he watched a video and now thinks, pasteurized milk is tyranny. Democracy requires reality too. It requires people accepting that elections count even when their side loses, that courts matter even when they rule against you, that laws mean something even when they are inconvenient. Political opponents are not automatically enemies, especially not enemies of the people. They are not demons. They're not vermin. They're not a disease in the bloodstream of the country. They're just people that you disagree with. Sometimes deeply, sometimes furiously, sometimes for very, very good reasons, but still people. Economic reform requires reality as well. You cannot fix an economy if people have been trained to blame their problems on everyone except the people and the institutions with actual power. If rent is crushing you, and healthcare is bankrupting you, and wages are stagnant, and groceries are brutal, and your retirement plan, is looking shaky, then you need a politics that can identify power clearly. Not just the person below you, not the immigrant with less power than you, not the trans kid trying to survive high school, not the teacher who's forced to buy classroom supplies with her own money, not the disabled person trying to keep their benefits or stay out of an institution, not the food stamp recipient who has somehow become the villain in a country where corporations can pocket subsidies with a straight face and yet still lecture everyone else about personal responsibility. Community requires reality too. It requires believing that your neighbor is a human being and not just some propaganda character, not the cartoon version that is being sold to you by an algorithm or a cable segment or a campaign ad or some influencer whose entire personality is yelling into a ring light like the republic depends on his pores. And this is where we have to be careful, because the problem is not disagreement. Disagreement is normal. Democracy is built for disagreement. We are supposed to argue about taxes and schools and policing and spending and foreign policy, the role of government, the limits of regulation, and what kind of country we want our country to be. That is not a flaw in democracy. Those arguments are not bad. That is democracy at work. The deeper problem is what happens when any agreement becomes impossible because facts themselves have been replaced by tribal loyalty. When evidence only matters if it helps your side, when expertise is only trusted if it flatters your worldview, when cruelty gets excused simply as telling it like it is, when every institution that might check power gets recast as an enemy, when truth becomes less important than your team, that is the wound underneath the wounds. Because if shared reality collapses, then every other solution is impossible. And before somebody says, dude, aren't you on social media too? Isn't your podcast on social media? And yes, it is. Yes, I am. That's the point. I'm not standing outside the system pretending that I'm squeaky clean. I'm standing inside the system saying we should probably stop pretending that the fumes it gives off are oxygen. There is nothing hypocritical about using a tool while criticizing the way the tool is designed or monetized or weaponized. The hypocrisy would be pretending the tool has no effect on us just because we enjoy using it. You can drive on roads and you can still criticize oil companies. You can work in a school and still be critical of standardized testing. You can have a retirement account and still think Wall Street has way too much power over ordinary life. Existing inside a system does not require me or you to put on a tiny party hat and celebrate every awful incentive that system creates. And social media does create incentives. Some good ones, by the way. I don't want to pretend that this is all poison and no medicine. People use these platforms to organize and to learn, to find community, to tell their stories, to expose abuse, to raise money, to share important information that powerful people might rather keep buried. There are people whose voices reached the public because social media existed, and there are movements that gain traction because ordinary people could bypass the old gatekeepers. And that matters. That is important. But let's not act like these platforms are neutral public squares where everyone strolls in with, their basket of fresh ideas and leaves healthier and happier. They are engineered attention machines. They measure what keeps you looking and clicking and scrolling and arguing and coming back. They learn what scares you. They learn what flatters you. They learn what enrages you. They learn what makes you feel seen and superior and threatened and vindicated or betrayed and or clever. And then they serve you more of it because your attention is the product. Not your wisdom, not your civic health, not your ability to sleep at night without feeling like the entire country is a burning clown car rolling downhill. Just your attention. That is the thing being harvested. So the issue isn't whether we use the platforms. We do. I do. I'm guessing you do. And that one uncle we all have does. And based on what he posted last Tuesday, someone should maybe check on him. The issue is whether we pretend the platforms are harmless. The issue is whether we pretend they are neutral while they train us to behave like lab rats. There's a difference between using social media to communicate and feeding the worst incentives of social media. There is a difference between explaining an issue and just rage farming. There is a difference between criticism and dehumanization. There's a difference between sharing information and just throwing raw meat onto into the outrage cage because you know it will get clicks. That difference matters. And if we're going to talk honestly about reality, we have to start there. Now, we would normally want to call this problem misinformation. And that's not wrong, but it's too small. Misinformation sounds like somebody got something wrong. Like that uncle posted a fake quote, or a Facebook page shared a photo from 2014 and pretended it happened yesterday, or somebody said a vaccine turns your pancreas into a Bluetooth speaker, which, please, for the love of all functioning organs, do not build your medical worldview around a guy whose profile picture is sunglasses in a pickup truck. But what we are dealing with is bigger than false claims floating around by accident. The deeper problem is infrastructure. Falsehood now has delivery systems. It has algorithms that learn what keeps people engaged. It has monetization systems that reward attention. It has influencer networks that convert paranoia into a personal brand. It has cable ecosystems that can turn one local story into a national panic before any of the facts have found their shoes. It has billionaire funding. It has bots. It has AI-generated sludge. It has fundraising emails with subject lines that sound like they were written by a rabid raccoon trapped in a panic room. And it has politicians who know exactly what they are doing. And that last part matters, because not every lie is a mistake. Don't think for a second that it is. Not every conspiracy theory is a misunderstanding. Not every panic arises organically. Sometimes the lie is useful. Sometimes the confusion is useful. Sometimes the goal is not to describe reality. It's to scramble reality until people become easier to move. Just look at the pattern. Election lies do not just make people wrong about an election. They make democracy itself feel conditional. If your side wins, it was the will of the people. If your side loses, it was fraud. That's not a disagreement over ballots. That's a demolition job. And it's worth noting that the folks who are normally pushing that narrative currently have the House, the Senate, the White House, and a majority on the Supreme Court. So I'm not exactly sure how that one gains so much traction, but it does. Anti-vaccine panic does not just make people wrong about medicine. It makes public health information feel like an attack. It turns nurses and researchers into villains. It takes a problem that requires trust and makes trust sound like surrender. Anti-immigrant rumors don't just spread false stories. They turn human beings into an invasion narrative. They make cruelty to people feel like defense. They make mass suffering sound like a border policy. Anti-LGBTQ moral panic does not just misrepresent people. It manufactures danger around people who are overwhelmingly just trying to get through their day without being legislated into a sermon. School conspiracy theories don't just attack a curriculum. They turn teachers into predators and librarians into radicals and classrooms into battlefields. And once that happens, every school board meeting starts sounding like, a hostage negotiation. Climate denial does not just reject science. It buys time for industries and politicians who benefit from that delay. And delay in climate terms is not neutral. Delay is policy. Delay is choosing the wound and calling it patience. The point isn't that every false claim is part of a master plan. That would be in and of itself its own conspiracy theory. And we don't need to build a conspiracy piñata just to prove a conspiracy is bad. The point is that lies now move through systems that reward them. That's the difference. A lie used to need a printing press or a pulpit or a newspaper or a broadcaster, or at least someone willing to stand in the town square and embarrass themselves at full volume. But now a lie can be packaged, targeted, boosted, monetized, clip mixed, laundered through influencers, defended by politicians, and turned into merchandise in the span of hours. So yes, misinformation matters, but misinformation is too small a word for what we're dealing with. The lie itself is not the whole problem. The machine that rewards the lie is the problem. And once lies have that infrastructure, hate becomes a business model. That is the part that we really have to sit with, because hate is not just an emotion in our politics. It's not just some ugly thing that bubbles up from time to time, just by mistake or by accident or coincidentally. Hate is useful. Hate gets people to click. It gets people to watch. Hate gets people to donate, to subscribe. It gets people to vote. Hate gets people to ignore the hand in their own pocket because someone has convinced them the real threat is standing 3 rungs below them on the ladder. Fear drives donations. It drives turnout. It drives subscriptions. So do resentment and outrage and dehumanization. And all of this engagement drives money. That is why the targets are chosen so carefully. Immigrants get turned into invaders, not workers, not families, not people fleeing violence or poverty or corruption or impossible choices. They're made out to be invaders. Because once you call someone an invader, the cruelty starts dressing itself up as a defense. Trans kids get turned into threats. Not children, not students, not humans trying to survive adolescence, which is already enough of a haunted corn maze without adults in suits holding press conferences about your existence. Threats, because once you turn a child into a threat, people will accept policies they would never have accepted if they were thinking about the child. Poor people get turned into cheats. Teachers get turned into groomers. Journalists get turned into enemies. Disabled people are labeled as burdens. Public servants are turned into, lazy sponges. Librarians somehow become the frontline troops of civilization's collapse because they had the nerve to keep books on shelves instead of replacing the entire collection with, pamphlets called Everything I Don't Like is Marxism. None of this is random. It is target selection. And the targets are usually people with less power than the people doing the targeting. That's the constant. That's the oldest trick in politics, convincing a struggling person that the reason they are struggling is someone with less power than they have themselves. If you're mad about rent, blame immigrants. If you're mad about wages, blame DEI. If you're mad about healthcare, blame trans people. If you're mad about schools, blame the teachers. If you're mad about your life feeling unstable or expensive or lonely or whatever, blame anyone except the people who are actually causing it. That trick works because it gives pain a face. And that matters. People don't always know what to do with systems. Systems are slippery and they have paperwork and acronyms and lobbyists. Systems have shareholders and shell companies and consulting firms and donors and tax lawyers and executives who say, marketing efficiency, while somebody else can't afford insulin. But a scapegoat is much easier than a system. A scapegoat is visible. A scapegoat can be pointed at from a podium. And while everyone is looking where they're told to look, the people with the actual power keep picking pockets in the fog. That is why this hate is so profitable. It converts structural failure into personal resentment. It takes anger that people should have towards broken systems and redirects it towards vulnerable people who can't fight back. It turns politics into some sort of carnival game where the prize is never a better life. The prize is just permission to hate someone who had nothing to do with the problems that you're experiencing in the first place. And there is a whole economy built around that permission. Cable panelists, influencer accounts, fundraising emails, campaign ads, podcasts, viral clips, merch tables, subscription platforms, politicians who find a new enemy every week because governing is hard, but panic has excellent margins. And to be clear, this isn't just about people saying mean stuff online. Dehumanization has consequences. Once you convince people that immigrants are invaders, it becomes easier to justify family separation or mass detention or raids or cruelty or violence even, and policies that treat suffering like a deterrent strategy. When you convince people that LGBTQ people are a threat, it becomes easier to justify the book bans and the medical restrictions and school censorship and harassment and laws that make people's ordinary lives harder, smaller, and often more dangerous. Once you convince people that journalists are enemies and elections are fake, it becomes so much easier to justify political violence and intimidation and authoritarian power grabs. These things are the danger. The hate machine does not just make people angry. It prepares them to accept harm. And somebody gets paid when it runs. Now, fact-checking matters, of course. Let me say that clearly, because there is always somebody waiting in the bushes to turn a reasonable point into the dumbest possible version of itself. Fact-checking matters. Evidence matters. Corrections matter. Journalism matters. Expertise matters. People who take the time to verify claims before launching them into the public bloodstream are doing very, very necessary work. But unfortunately, fact-checking alone can't save us. Not because it's bad, but because it's simply outnumbered. A lie can be simple, emotional, and perfectly shaped for outrage. A correction usually has to be careful, specific, sourced, contextual, and about as exciting as reading the terms and conditions on a dishwasher. But the lie says they are stealing the election. The correction has to say, actually, after audits, lawsuits, recounts, court filings, certification processes, and reviews by officials from both parties, and by that time, half the audience is already tuned out. The lie says teachers are grooming your kids. The correction has to say, here is what the curriculum actually says. Here is the school policy. Here is the difference between age-appropriate education and the moral panic currently being launched by people who could not identify a lesson plan if it bit them in the ass. The lie has already turned the teacher into a villain. The correction is still trying to source all of its claims. That's the problem. Lies move like lightning, way faster than corrections. Corrections rarely reach the same audience. And the people producing the lies don't need to win every argument. They only need to flood the room. That is the strategy. Flood the room with claims, flood it with rumors and screenshots and clips and headlines and memes and anonymous posts and fake experts and fake outrage and fake persecution and fake patriotism and fake Christianity and fake populism. Just keep flooding it. Because if the room fills fast enough, people stop asking which claim is true. They start asking whether truth is even findable. That is when propaganda really, really gets dangerous. Because a lot of propaganda is not designed to make you believe one specific lie. It's designed to make you give up on truth entirely. It wants you exhausted. It wants you cynical. It wants you to say things like, everybody lies, or who even really knows? It wants you to decide that every institution is corrupt, every expert is bought, every journalist is fake, every court is rigged. Every election is suspect. Every public servant is part of the plot, and every fact is just an opinion. That's not skepticism. That's surrender. Healthy skepticism asks for evidence. Manufactured paranoia rejects evidence before it even has a chance to arrive. Healthy skepticism says, show me the source. Manufactured paranoia says, any source you show me is just fake news. It's part of the conspiracy. Those are obviously different things. And we have to stop pretending that they're not. Because once people believe truth is impossible to find, then power gets a free hand. If nothing is knowable, then accountability is impossible. Every fact is fake, then every lie is usable. If every institution is corrupt, then the strongest person in the room gets to define what is reality just through force. That is why fact-checking matters, but fact-checking alone is not enough. They do not need to believe every lie. They just need you to believe that truth is impossible to find. And this is where the problem gets closer to home, because shared reality does not only come from national institutions, it comes from local ones too. It comes from the local newspaper that covers the school board without trying to turn it into a gladiator pit. It comes from the library where people actually share public space. It comes from unions and churches and neighborhood groups and fire halls and civic organizations, community events, town meetings, food banks, volunteer boards, youth sports, and just the boring machinery of local life. And I mean boring as a compliment. Some things are supposed to be boring. School board meetings are supposed to be boring. Zoning hearings are supposed to be boring. Library board meetings should be boring. Local government should not feel like the final battle in a movie where everyone is, wearing flag capes and screaming about Marxism. Boring can be healthy. Boring means people are solving practical problems instead of performing, national identity theatrics. But when local reality weakens, something else moves in. The national propaganda. Because if your town no longer has a strong local paper, no local civic culture, no shared institutions, no places where people with different politics actually see each other as whole human beings, then your sense of reality has to come from somewhere else. Cable panels and Facebook groups and TikTok outrage loops and billionaire-owned platforms, national influencers who do not even know your town exists, but are very happy to tell you who to hate inside it. And that changes everything. Suddenly, your school board is not your school board, it's a battlefield. Your library isn't just your library, it's a symbol of national panic. Your neighbor is not your neighbor. They're a stand-in for whatever political nightmare you were sold last night by Fox News, who is also monetizing your fear. That is what happens when your local reality dies. National propaganda moves in to fill that vacuum. And loneliness only makes it worse, because lonely people are easier to manipulate. Isolated people are easier to radicalize. People who feel unseen and unheard and disrespected and powerless are more vulnerable to anyone who gives them a story that makes their pain feel meaningful. That story can be healthy. It can be a community that helps. It can be solidarity. It can be, dude, you're not alone, and we can build something together. But it can also be poison. It can be, you are not alone because we have a common enemy. That's the darker version, of course. And a lot of modern politics is very good at offering that darker version. It gives people belonging through resentment. It gives them identity through opposition. A community built around shared enemies, which, isn't really a community. It's just loneliness with a common target. And that's why local institutions matter, not because they're perfect. They're not. Local institutions can fail just like anything else. They can exclude, they can be corrupt, they can be stale or biased or small-minded or slow, whatever. I'm not putting a halo on, the town council just because it meets at the American Legion Hall. But when local institutions are working, they anchor people in actual life. They remind us that the person across from us is more than a vote, more than a meme, more than just a demographic, more than just the worst thing someone on television told us that a person can represent. They give reality roots. And right now, too many of those roots have been cut. So what the hell do we do? Because this cannot just be 40 minutes of me walking around the emergency room saying, yeah, that's bad. That's also bad. And well, over there, that's on fire. And I think the fire is subscribed to a podcast. The diagnosis matters, but the diagnosis is not the treatment. And the treatment is not just one thing. There is no single lever that we can pull that makes reality stable again. There's no silver bullet that, can stop making everyone weird and furious. Though if there were, I would like to know why it's been hidden behind the button that makes all the videos louder for no reason. The cure are pressure points. First is something called algorithmic transparency. Now, that does not mean government opens up a ministry of truth. Nobody should want the government deciding what is true, especially in a country where the government can change hands and suddenly the person defining truth is a guy who thinks every bad poll was rigged by communists or windmills or Taylor Swift. Algorithmic transparency means the public should have some way to understand the machinery that decides what millions of people see. What gets amplified? What gets buried? What kinds of content keep people engaged? What kinds of content make money? What risks are being created by recommendation systems that can push people towards more extreme, more conspiratorial, more dehumanizing material? If a company builds a machine that shapes public reality, it should not get to hide the machine and then shrug when the public starts, hallucinating enemies. The second thing is demonetize hate. That means asking a very simple question. Who got paid when this spread? Not just who said the thing, but who profited from it. Which platform earned engagement? Which influencer gained subscribers? Which campaign raised money? Which media outlet sold ads? Which politician got attention? Which billionaire-funded organization turned the panic into policy? Hate doesn't run on vibes. It runs on incentives. Advertisers have a role, and platforms have a role, and the payment processors, and the donors, and users have a role. If an ecosystem is built around dehumanizing and lies, then people in the institution should stop feeding it, whether that's money or attention or legitimacy or whatever. Third, rebuild local journalism. Local news is not nostalgia. It is democratic infrastructure. It tells people what is actually happening where they actually live. It covers things like the zoning board and the school budget and the county commissioner and the hospital closure and the police contract and water systems, just real issues that actually shape people's daily lives. Without local news, national outrage, again, sweeps into the vacuum. And national outrage does not care about your town. Fox News doesn't care what little village you live in. Neither does MS Now or CNN or any of them. They just care about using your town as a prop. Fourth, support libraries and civic institutions. Libraries are not just book warehouses with, calm lighting. They are public reality anchors. They are places where people can access information and services and community and technology and actual human help without being treated like just a customer profile. And civic institutions matter because people need places to practice being citizens together and getting along. Not just consumers, not just audiences, not just usernames in a comment section, with really, really questionable grammar and punctuation. Citizens. Fifth, teach information self-defense. And not the dry version where someone says media literacy and everybody immediately ages 6 months. A practical media self-defense. Check the date. Find the original source. Watch the entire clip. Ask who benefits. Notice when a post is trying to make you furious before it gives you any evidence whatsoever. Learn the difference between reporting and opinion, between facts and rumors and satire and propaganda. And some guy named Patriot Eagle 1776 who says, many people are asking under a picture that looks like it was generated by a toaster. Pause before you share. That pause is so underrated. The machine that I've been talking about, it hates the pause. Sixth, stop rewarding dehumanizing politics. Politicians who turn vulnerable people into monsters should pay a price. Electoral, financial, public, reputational. Not because disagreement should be punished. Disagree all day. Argue about a policy until the coffee gets cold. But dehumanization is not just disagreement. It is preparation. It teaches people who it's okay to harm. And finally, use social media with discipline. Do not amplify garbage just to dunk on it. Don't feed the outrage machine every time it flashes. Don't confuse virality with authenticity. Don't let the algorithm decide which stranger you are supposed to hate. Attention is the coin of the realm. Every time we spend it carelessly, the machine gets paid. Now, there is one more thing that I want to say clearly. Reality is not neutrality. Shared reality does not mean pretending both sides are equally honest. It does not mean splitting the difference between a fact and a lie. It doesn't mean treating cruelty as just another policy flavor. That's not balance. That is surrender. We have trained ourselves, especially in political media, to treat conflict as the same thing as complexity. One person says it's raining. Another person says rain is a Marxist hoax created by globalists and drag queens and the deep state weather service. And then some anchor with very serious eyebrows says strong views on both sides. No. Sometimes one side is wrong. Sometimes one side is closer to reality. Sometimes one side is lying. Sometimes one side is using uncertainty as camouflage. And if we can't say that, then we're not defending shared reality. We're just embalming it. This is one of my biggest qualms these days, is that no matter how outrageous the thing that's said, no matter how obvious the lie, no matter how ridiculous the statement that's made, very often in front of a room full of reporters, it is such a rarity for a reporter to ever say, no, wait a minute, that's not correct. And why is that? I mean, I guess I know why it is, because they're protecting their jobs. But what good are their jobs if they're just going to stand there and scribble down something that's patently false? But anyway, shared reality means that evidence matters. Words mean things. People are people. Elections count. Science is not witchcraft. Journalists are not automatically enemies. Teachers are not automatically predators. Immigrants are not an invading army. LGBTQ people are not a national emergency. And poor people are not the reason billionaires pay lower tax rates. That is not partisan extremism. That's the floor. That's the basic operating system of a society that hasn't fully decided to become just a comment section. And yes, people can disagree about policy. They can disagree about immigration levels and tax rates and school curriculum and any number of other things. Those debates can be serious. They can be sharp. They can be difficult, but they should happen. But not every position earns the dignity of being called just another viewpoint. If your politics requires turning human beings into vermin, invaders, predators, parasites, enemies, or threats simply for existing, then the problem is not that other people are too sensitive. The problem is that your politics needs a body count before it can explain itself. Cruelty is not a policy preference, and reality repair requires people to say that. It also requires honesty about institutions. Trust does not mean blind obedience. Trust the experts should never mean turn off your brain and clap for the credentials. Experts can be wrong. Institutions can fail. Journalists can miss stories. Courts can make disastrous decisions. Scientists can disagree. Governments can lie. Universities can be arrogant. Public agencies can be slow and defensive and infuriating. Skepticism is healthy. Accountability is healthy. Transparency is healthy. But there is a difference between skepticism and sabotage. Skepticism asks where the evidence is. Sabotage says all evidence is fake unless it serves me. Skepticism says, who funded this study? Sabotage says, everyone I dislike is bought and paid for. Skepticism says institutions should earn my trust. Sabotage says no institution can ever earn my trust, so give power to the loudest strongman in the room. That's the trap. The people attacking shared reality are not replacing flawed institutions with better ones. They're replacing trust with obedience. They're replacing evidence with loyalty, public accountability with personal power. So no, reality is not neutrality. Reality is not the middle point between a fact and a lie. Reality is the ground we need beneath our feet before we can argue about what the first step is. So let's go back to the emergency room. Patient's not dead. That matters. The patient is in trouble, big trouble. Patient is feverish and bleeding and confused and exhausted and being poisoned. Well, somebody stands next to the bed insisting that the poison is medicine, but the patient is not dead. And the first treatment is not pretending that we can cure every wound at once, because we can't. Climate needs its own treatment. War needs its own treatment. Poverty, loneliness, AI, healthcare, housing, democracy, political violence, all of it needs real work, real policy, real organizing. It needs courage. It needs accountability. But none of those treatments survive if the patient has been trained to reject reality itself. So the first treatment is reality repair. Not politeness, not false unity, not limp little fantasies that, if we all just lower our voices, the people making money from chaos will suddenly develop a conscience and take up bird watching. Now, reality repair. And that starts with refusal. Refuse to let powerful people assign your enemies. Refuse to confuse cruelty with strength. Refuse to share what you have not checked. Refuse to reward people who make you feel smart by making you hate someone weaker. Refuse to let algorithms decide your moral universe. Refuse to treat exhaustion like wisdom. Refuse to believe that cynicism is somehow sophistication. Refuse to let the people poisoning the room sell themselves as the oxygen. Because that's the whole trick. They poison the room with lies, panic and hatred and suspicion and rage, and then they point at the coughing and say, see, you need us. No, we need reality. We need evidence without worshiping credentials. We need skepticism without surrendering to paranoia. We need institutions that earn trust, journalism that tells the truth and calls out the lie, schools that teach people how to think, platforms that are accountable for what they amplify, and citizens who understand that attention is not free just because the app is. And we need to remember something very, very simple. Your neighbor is probably not the monster that you think they are. Your pain is probably not caused by someone less fortunate than you. And the people most desperate to keep you angry sideways are usually terrified that you might start looking upward. Reality is not the cure for every wound. It is the antidote to the poison that keeps us from treating them. And the first dose is refusal. Thank you, everybody, for taking the time to download and listen to this episode of Your Neighbor on the Left. I'm so glad you did. And I can only imagine there are a lot of opinions on this. I would love to hear yours. If you go to the website, neighborontheleft.com, go to the contact section, DM me through social media or use the email address to send an email. Let me know what you think on this. Let me know what you think of the podcast. Let me know what you think, period. While you're on the website, go to the episodes page. You can download or stream any episode of the podcast going all the way back to the beginning. And check out the blog section, as I always say, because I post to the blog whenever I do an episode of the podcast, and I list all of the sources that I use, which, as I've been saying for the last hour or so, is very important these days. I'll be back on Wednesday with another episode of Your Neighbor on the Left. So between now and then, stay engaged, stay kind, and have the kind of week you'd wish for others.